Residents of New Bern, North Carolina wade through floodwaters from Hurricane Florence to survey the damage. The hurricane has killed at least 4 people and has caused massive damage. Hundreds of residents who ignored evacuation orders before Hurricane Florence struck are now feeling remorse as they plead to be rescued from first responders who are stretched to capacity and racing against time as floodwaters rise. Swift water rescue teams had saved more than 360 people in New Bern, North Carolina by mid-afternoon Friday, and another 140 were still waiting for help, a city spokeswoman said. The city was placed under mandatory evacuation orders prior to the storm, but many there and elsewhere chose to disregard the order. "I feel like the dumbest human being who ever walked the face of the earth," said Tom Balance, who owns a restaurant in New Bern, on his decision not to evacuate. Though not directly on the coast, New Bern was inundated by a massive 10-foot storm surge when the adjacent Neuse River burst its banks on Thursday night as Florence simultaneously dumped huge amounts of rain on the area, as much as 23 inches in nearby Morehead City. Balance said his wife went to Atlanta and he stayed behind in their New Bern home with their 3 dogs and a cat. Around 3:30 p.m. Thursday, the electricity went out. By midnight, his rain gauge showed that he'd gotten 9 inches of rain since mid-afternoon. He drifted off to sleep. About 40 minutes later, he woke and went to a sunroom, where he'd boarded up all the windows except for a small hole. He shone a flashlight through the glass. "I about jumped out of my skin," he said in a phone interview Friday morning. These were waves crashing down. Those waves were coming from the Neuse River, which is about 25 feet away, and downhill, from his house. He made a plan B, if the water reached the house. He'd take the pets upstairs to the 2nd floor. The water kept rising and kept rising, he said. But the water never quite made it to his home. Balance called the rainfall biblical, saying he's gotten reports from friends that his downtown seafood restaurant was flooded, just like the rest of the downtown. More than 1.7 million people in North and South Carolina were under evacuation orders before Florence hit, but it's unclear how many of them decided to remain. Nearly a million are without power in the Carolinas early on Saturday, with 773,559 outages in North Carolina and 166,589 without electricity in South Carolina. By Friday night, the center of the now tropical storm had drifted south of the border into South Carolina, raising fears that Myrtle Beach could be cut off from the mainland by flooding as authorities suspended emergency service. On Friday, though, much of the rescue activity centered on New Bern, where officials kicked the famed Louisiana Cajun Navy out of town despite the huge backlog of rescue requests, saying they would be handled through official channels and by local volunteers. The city of about 29,000, which was founded in the early 1700s and was briefly the state capital, is near the North Carolina coast and is bordered on the east and south, respectively, by 2 rivers, the Neuse and Trent. 67-year-old Sadie Marie Holt was among those rescued Friday in New Bern. Holt, who has diabetes and clogged arteries, said she stayed for doctor's appointments that were canceled at the last minute. She tried to row out of her neighborhood Thursday night with a boat that was in her yard after her home began to flood, but had to retreat because of the poor conditions. "The wind was so hard, the waters were so hard that, trying to get out, we got thrown into trailers. We got thrown into mailboxes, houses, trees," Holt said. Don Baldwin Gibson, 47, a minister and private school founder who lives on a farm closer to the coast in nearby Pamlico County and runs a Facebook page about weather in eastern North Carolina, had evacuated to New Bern to stay with family, thinking it would be a safer spot. Gibson said Friday that while she and her family were safe, she and her husband had gotten around 75 calls and texts from others asking for help. And from that point, we started hearing where people were saying on phone calls, "I love you" to their family members because they were not sure they were going to get out of it alive, she said Friday. "It's like a bomb has gone off," New Bern resident George Zaytoun told Good Morning America on Friday. "Everything around us is underwater." Zaytoun now regrets his decision to stay. "I think we kind of let our guards down," he said of his community's response to the storms being downgraded before landfall. The National Weather Service said flash flooding was expected to continue through the rest of Friday in New Bern and surrounding areas. A 24-hour curfew was in effect. Roberts, the city spokeswoman, said preliminary estimates show about 4,300 residences and 300 commercial buildings had been damaged. She said that count is expected to increase significantly. In other parts of the evacuation zones, residents were also left ruing their decision to stay, and wondering how they would escape. Across the Neuse River from New Bern in Barbara, resident Kim Dunn, the mother of a 10-month-old, a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, said she made a decision to stay behind while others fled. "We were trying to figure out if we had enough finances to get out, and if we were to get out, were we going to be able to get back home? So we made a decision to stay," she told ABC News. "I don't know how long it's going to be before the water actually starts to come into the apartment." Trying to escape on Friday, she was trapped in her truck surrounded by rising waters. Her boyfriend and his cousin were stranded on a paddle boat less than a mile away. The water was as high as street signs. "And we have no way to get to them," Dunn said. "They've been out there for about 6 hours now, just screaming for help," she said. "Only communication we have with them is just me flashing my lights to them, and I think they have a flashlight they're flickering back to us." About 75 miles southwest, in Sneed's Ferry, resident Jeanette Rivera said staying put had seemed like a good idea until the devastation became clear on Friday. "I'm really upset at myself for staying," Jeanette Rivera, 47, told NBC News. "I just want to get out of here. Half my dock is floating," she said. "Our house is completely surrounded by the ocean on all sides. I feel like our house could go at any minute. We already have a foot of water in our garage and the neighbor's house is completely flooded out. It's difficult for me to watch," she said. "Every angle that I look, I'm surrounded by ocean." In a Facebook post, Rivera explained that she and her husband had stayed behind because they expected the impact to be more like Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and because they feared looters raiding their home. "Is it scary? Yes. Have I cried? You bet. Have I said what the hell were we thinking? Yup. But we're here," she wrote. President Donald Trump received a briefing on the federal disaster response in the White House Situation Room on Friday. White House spokesman Hogan Gidley said Trump called North Carolina officials to assure them that the federal government stood ready and prepared to assist with anything their state and respective communities would need during this natural disaster. After being ejected from New Bern, the Cajun Navy headed down toward the coast, responding to an SOS on Facebook from the Carteret County Humane Society in Newport. The Humane Society pleaded for help, saying that at least 2 people along with 43 dogs and about 80 cats were trapped on the top floor of the building, USA Today reported. Roughly 15 chickens and roosters were also stuck in an area at the back of the facility, but flooding kept staff from reaching them. The Cajun Navy helped escort the shelter workers to safety later that evening, and emergency personnel put the animals in large vehicles soon after. The storm has already killed 5, including a mother and her 8-month-old baby. Lesha Murphy Johnson and her baby Adam were trapped inside their home in Wilmington after a tree fell onto the roof at around 9:30 a.m. on Friday. Firefighters frantically tried to lift the tree so they could escape, but were unable to do so, kneeling in a circle of prayer after it became apparent there was nothing further they could do. The baby's father, Lawrence, was rescued and taken into an ambulance, but police declared the mother and baby dead at 2:30 p.m. National Guard were then called in to remove the shattered tree. Murphy Johnson's death was confirmed to dailymail.com by her ex-husband, who was shown her ID by authorities and asked to identify her. Separately, A woman died of a heart attack in Hampstead after medics were unable to reach her, officials announced on Friday afternoon. In Kinston, 2 additional fatalities were reported. A 78-year-old man was electrocuted while trying to connect a generator extension cord in the rain, and a 77-year-old man was found dead outside of his home, possibly after having been blown over by the wind while checking on his dogs, officials said.